Welcome to Impact Makers Radio, helping you to find jargon-free information before choosing a professional to help solve your problems and live the life you love. And here's your host, Stewart Andrew Alexander.
Hi, and welcome to another Let's Talk Divorce conversation. And during this segment of the show, ladies and gentlemen, I am so pleased to say that we finally have divorce mediator and collaborative attorney Joy Rosenthal, owner of Rosenthal Law and Mediation in New York. Now, Joy, who has a wealth of experience in the area of family-based mediation, we'll be talking to you today about a very interesting topic. Now, I see Joy's taken the time out of her busy day to come and speak with us about using a collaborative process for your divorce. So, if you are one of the many people in the New York area, it might be a good idea for you to, stop what you're doing. Log out of Facebook, stop the Twittering and Instagramming or anything else that you happen to be doing which may cause a distraction. And you know something? You might even want to grab a notepad and pen and get ready to take some notes as we listen in to what Joy has to share with us today. So, with that said, let's not keep her waiting any longer. She's a very busy lady. Welcome to the show, Joy.
Well, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
You are so welcome, my dear. We are so glad to have you here as well. Our first guest for the year of 2018, so really excited about that too. So, Joy, we are limited by time, so let's just jump feet first in. Briefly, in your own words, of course, describe the kinds of people who you serve and the various types of situations they find themselves in when they come to you for your help.
Well, today we're really focusing on the collaborative law process, and that is a process that's similar to mediation. So it's for people who are getting divorced and want to do it in a way that honors the integrity of the family and honors the integrity of the other person and of themselves, but and wants to figure out a fair and equitable way to divide assets, to share time with the children, and to make sure that both parties have enough to live on. So collaborative law is similar to mediation in that the parties themselves are in the driver's seat. They are making the decisions, and they're speaking directly with each other. They have a little more support than parties do when they're in mediation. So instead of there just being the two people in the room with a neutral mediator, each party has their lawyer side by side. The lawyers are trained as mediators, so the lawyers are both advocating for their clients and helping their clients come to a resolution. And the things that distinguish collaborative process are, from the beginning, they agree not to go to court, and if the case does end up in court, they have to use other lawyers. There's an open exchange of financial information, and they're seeking mutually beneficial solutions. So it's really like a problem. I think of it as a problem-solving exercise, where there are a certain number of problems that you have to sort out and make decisions about in order to come up with a divorce agreement. But this is 4 people working together on it, usually, rather than 3 in a mediation.
Okay, thanks for sharing that with us, Joy. Before we go any further, I'd just like to take care of a very important formality. It goes without saying that anything you share with us today is not legal advice or legal assistance. It's purely for the purpose of sharing information. Now, can we both agree on that, Joy, or would you like to just expand on that in your own words?
I absolutely agree with that. Yes, I'm not talking about anybody's specific situation. Every family is different. Every situation is different. Every divorce is different. So if you're in the process of getting divorced, I highly recommend that you find a lawyer in your area who you can talk to. And if you can find a collaborative attorney or a mediator, so much the better.
Perfect, perfect. With that said then, Joy, let's talk about some of the common misconceptions that you come across while you're out there working with your clients. Please share one or two, please.
A lot of times people think that collaborative process is the same as a negotiated process between litigators. It's very different. When lawyers litigate and negotiate directly with each other, a lot of times they're not consulting with their clients. Traditional lawyers have an obligation to do what's best for their client. It's called zealous advocacy in law school. And the perspective of the collaborative attorney, much like the perspective of a mediator, is very different. It's systemic. It's trying to find what's best for the family as a whole, so every person in the family can benefit as well as possible. It's a very different perspective. For instance, collaborative attorneys are much more likely to take the children's needs into account. Collaborative attorneys will look for solutions that benefit not only their client, but also benefit the other client, or at least do as little harm to the other client as possible. And so the goal of the collaborative process is to come up with a solution that everybody in the family can live with. It's much less competitive. It's much less adversarial. And so the common misconception is that you could do a collaborative process without having a lawyer who's been specifically trained in it.
So I'd like you to keep your client's confidentiality in mind, of course, Joy, but based on what you just shared with us, could you please share an example or a case study, so to speak, of how you have helped, or even how you would go about helping somebody who came to you with that misconception or those challenges that you just described, and what kind of transformational results you were able to, or let's say in general, would be able to gain for them?
Well, as I mentioned earlier in passing, all collaborative attorneys are trained as mediators. So they all have that mediation kind of mindset. And the best collaborative cases that I've done, the other collaborative attorney and I are acting almost as co-mediators. And one case I had with a very experienced collaborative attorney, I represented the wife, and the husband wanted to move cross-country for a job. And the wife they had a small child. The wife didn't want to let that happen, and was quite angry about it. But the husband really had gotten a fantastic job. And we worked through many different scenarios. We worked through what would happen if the husband stayed. We worked through what would happen if the wife moved. We went through many different scenarios, and a lot of it came up. There were times when we actually met with the husband on the phone because he needed to be out west for work. And finally, we came up with a solution, and that involved the husband making it possible for the wife to move, and the wife's job actually let her move. And a few years later, I checked in with them, and she told me that they were all living out west, and they were all very happy. It was the kind of thing that really would never have happened in court. It was not negotiated according to the law strictly. It was negotiated according to what the family really needed. It was creative. It was thoughtful. It took the child's needs into account, and it worked. It was really beautiful because I've been involved in other relocation hearings in court, and it's just had very different kind of ending.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Joy. That's going to be really useful for any of our listeners out there who are tuning in and, looking for solutions. They're looking at their options for divorce today. So as a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is divorce mediator and collaborative attorney Joy Rosenthal, owner of Rosenthal Law and Mediation in New York. And she's here today talking about, as you've heard already, using a collaborative process for your divorce. Now, with that in mind, Joy, and for those people who are listening in right now, what's one of the many pitfalls, and I'm sure you could share hundreds of pitfalls with us, but what's one of the many pitfalls, or let's say even misguided truths, that the listeners need to be aware of no matter what situation they find themselves in?
I think you said it earlier. Don't hate your spouse more than you love your children. That's really wisdom in getting divorced. It's very easy to be so hurt and so disappointed and so mistrustful that you forget why you fell in love with this person to begin with, that you forget that there's anything good about them, that you forget that they are your child's only other parent, and your child is going to continue to have a relationship with them, and you're going to continue to co-parent. So it really would be better to find some way to make peace with that person. And better for you. The stress of divorce is it's so intense because it's personal. There's nothing more personal than talking about your home, talking about your kids, talking about very intimate stuff. So I think the biggest gift that you could give yourself in the process is to take some time to care for yourself and to take some time to remember that the other person is not your enemy, is also hurt and disappointed, and you may not like them, but you're really transitioning from an intimate relationship to almost a business-like relationship. It's very hard to do, but it's doable.
Absolutely. And let me just share with our listeners some context, because you alluded to something that I said during a conversation we had before we came on air, where you asked me about the show. You was asking us some of the reasons why I was doing this, and then I explained to Joy that one of the main reasons for me doing this particular series of Let's Talk Divorce is because I myself was a child of divorce, and I experienced a very volatile, a very bloody divorce between my parents. I was 9 years old, and I didn't know how to handle that. I didn't have the resources. I was only a child, and I ended up carrying the guilt of my parents' breakup throughout my teenage years, throughout my young adult years, in my teens and my 20s and my 30s, even into my mid-40s. And it wasn't until then that I developed the tools and resources and know-how to be able to cope with the psychological impact, or the negative impact that had on my life. And I was speaking with Joy about that, and just how much impact a divorce has, especially where there's a lot of conflict and this is taking place in front of the children, and that just how, as a child, I picked up on every single nuance. Even though my parents at times thought they were hiding it, I was able to pick up on that, and because I couldn't process it, I carried the guilt of their breakup myself. So that's something that Joy and I was talking about, and it's what she alluded to, and I just wanted to tie up any loose ends there before we continue. So thank you for sharing that answer with us, Joy. It's going to be, again, very, very useful for our listeners.
I'm glad you did share that, because I think that's one of the things that people forget about. They get so involved with fighting with their ex-spouse that they forget that the children are listening. They forget that the children are right there. And it is very painful for the children.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just cannot underpin that enough for you, our listener, right now. If you do find yourself in that unfortunate position, as I shared with Joy, please do love your children more than you hate each other right now at this moment. You may have valid reasons to be at each other's throats. However, the children, they're the invisible ones. They don't have a voice. And this is what this show is all about. It's about indirectly giving those children a voice by inviting experts like Joy onto the show who come on and generously share these insights in the hope that you, our dear listener, may take on a different perspective, see things from a different perspective, and decide to communicate in a more amicable way in front of your children. Anyway, let's move on then, Joy. You've got me kind of curious now. How many years have you been a collaborative attorney, Joy?
I graduated from law school in 1996, so I've been doing this for 21 years. For the first 10 years, I actually represented children. I represented children in family court in some custody proceedings with and adoptions, and I worked with children who were in foster care.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to come back and I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak a little bit more about your past and, what led you to this field. But for now, let me ask you this then, Joy. When you think about all of the people who you've helped, I mean, you've been at this for nearly 21 years, you said. If you think back to all of those people who you've been able to help to achieve the transformation they were looking for when they initially reached out to you for your help, on a deep down personal level, Joy, what does it give you? What do you actually get from it, and how does it make you feel?
Well, I've always wanted to work with families, and I think that it helps bring more dignity into the world. For me personally, this is part of my commitment to alternative dispute resolution and to bringing more peace in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think that by finding a solution that works for everyone in the family, it enables people to move on with their lives more healthily, and it's better for the children to be in a non-adversarial environment. It's better for the parents. It's very gratifying.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me feel good as a person, and I feel good that I'm able to help people and still make a living at what I do.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing that, Joy. It's always great for our listeners just to hear, what's in it for the professional that they're considering taking on to represent their personal situation. So thank you for being so open and vulnerable and honest. So thanks for that. Really appreciate it. So moving on, as I alluded to before, Joy, could you just spend a brief moment telling us a little bit about your backstory, and especially your formal education and your experience as it relates to the topic of collaborative law?
Sure. I graduated from CUNY Law School, which specializes in law and the service of human needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew when I went to law school that I wanted to work with families or children. As I said, I worked for the Legal Aid Society for 10 years representing children in family court. I did a little bit of work with parents during that time as well. And I worked with children from the ages of 0 to 21, helping older children prepare for a life on their own after having been in foster care for a long time, helping younger children get adopted or go back to return to their parents. And I was doing this in the South Bronx. It was the end of the crack epidemic. And I saw a lot, and I really saw how children were divided, had divided loyalties. They might have recognized that the new situation they were in, if they were in foster care, was safer for them, but they never lost love and devotion and loyalty to their parents. And that was really remarkable to me. And I really loved working with the kids. I had a lot of respect for them, for their resourcefulness and their sense of fairness, and, as I said, their loyalty. And after doing that for about 10 years, I was kind of burnt out, and I started working with kids in delinquency proceedings, which is criminal proceedings for children that were also being done in family court. And a lot of those cases were school fights. And I really got interested in mediation at that point because one child would get arrested, but it wasn't so much of a situation where there was a victim and a perpetrator. It was really two kids who were in conflict with each other. And I saw that mediation was the way to go with them. And I really wanted to understand why mediation, like how mediation could be used in families. And that's when I started learning about divorce mediation. And I recognized that mediation doesn't always work for every family. So I was then attracted to collaborative law, which has mediation as its basis. But as I said before, it provides more support. So in about 2007, I started doing collaborative law. So I've been doing that for about 10 years and learned a lot from my collaborative counterparts, from the other attorneys I work with. Learn a lot because, as I said, also every situation is different, every family is different. There's so many different aspects. By all the different guests you've had on the show have talked about the financial aspects, the relationship aspects, the part of working with your kids. There's so many different aspects of divorce. It's always interesting. There's something to learn in every situation. So that's really how I came about it, and I've been really lucky to be able to create a career out of something I love.
Right, so when you think about the collaborative process then, Joy, where do you see it in the future? Let's say 5-10 years down the line, where do you see the collaborative process heading in terms of the perception of the general public?
I'm really hoping that it will become much more mainstream. Started in Minnesota about 20 years ago and has now expanded to every state in the United States. And I just went to an international conference where there were people from Germany and Australia and all over Europe. There were a lot of people from France there. So I'm really hoping that it takes off. It's less adversarial than a traditional divorce process. It's usually less expensive. One of the things that I forgot to mention is that one of the cornerstones also is using neutral financial advisors and sometimes neutral child specialists. So rather than having competing experts, you have one expert that's employed by both parties, which makes it also cheaper. So I'm really hoping that it takes hold because mediation is fantastic for the people it works for.
Absolutely.
But collaborative is it's a cousin almost, and there are people who might need a little more structure. There might be a bigger power imbalance. Some people just need to have more support in the room when they're doing the negotiations, and collaborative is a great solution for that.
Okay then, Joy, for those people who are listening in right now, what final thoughts would you like to share with them before we close out with our last question for today?
Well, if you're thinking about getting divorced, I would really think about the different process options you have and talk about it with your spouse. So this is not talking about the content of what you're going to be deciding, but really think first about the process that you will use to make the decisions that go into the divorce. So if you can go down to the corner coffee shop and sit down and write everything out on a napkin, some people can do that. That's wonderful. If you can sit in a room and negotiate directly with each other with a neutral mediator, that's fantastic. If you still want to negotiate directly but need more support, collaborative is a fantastic process. If you can't do any of those things, then hiring a lawyer to negotiate on your behalf might be a good idea. And lastly, of course, is going to court. I said it in the order where it gets more adversarial and therefore more expensive. But the one thing I always say is, whose kids do you want to put through college, yours or mine? It's really much better if you can sit down and work it out together with whatever kind of help you need. It's much better, much less expensive, and keeps your resources back in your family.
That's a great analogy. Just repeat that one more time about whose kids you'd like to put in college. And that's something worth repeating.
Whose kids do you want to put through college, yours or mine?
That's amazing. I really like that. That would really make me sit up and think. And hopefully for those people who are tuning in right now, that has made them sit up and think. And maybe at this stage, after listening to you for the last 20-25 minutes or so, they feel that they want to know more about using the collaborative process for their divorce. So if that's the case, then Joy, how can they connect with you? What's the easiest way?
Go to my website, which is joyrosenthal.com, and you can read about me, read about that, read about collaborative process mediation if you're in the New York area. If you're not in the New York area, just look up collaborative process and find people who are in your area. The website for the International Academy of Collaborative Practitioners is collaborativepractice.com. And that has, you can find a directory there of people who practice collaborative process in every part of the world.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been listening to divorce mediator and collaborative attorney, Joy Rosenthal. Thank you so much for sharing so generously with us today, Joy. You have, without a doubt, 100% hands down demonstrated that you are a true educator, advocate, and trustworthy advisor for your client's success. So thank you.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure.
You are so welcome, Joy. And I'd just like to take a moment to say a big thank you to you. Yes, you, the listener. Without you, we wouldn't have anybody to speak to. So thank you for joining us on, what I can only describe as a very insightful and informative conversation with one of the leading divorce mediators and collaborative attorneys in the New York area today. Again, as a reminder, her name is Joy Rosenthal. Make sure you do check her out. Give her a call, visit her website, whatever you do decide to do. I'm sure that after listening to Joy today, you'll most certainly be in good hands. So that's it for today. Again, my name is Stewart Andrew Alexander, and we'll be back shortly with some more leading collaborative process professionals in this, our series of Let's Talk Divorce Conversations. So, until then, take care, have a great day, and we'll talk real soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Impact Makers Radio. To listen to all past, present and future industry thought leaders and trendsetters, visit us at impactmakersradio.com.